Hey guys, I'm Dimension Jump, and today I'll be doing my top 5 least favourite parts of video games. Now, this video will be me talking about certain areas in video games or certain parts that are part of the games that you can do, and because there are areas in games that I think are quite enjoyable, and there are I think a lot of the games that I've played do have some cool moments or things you can do. So, for example, whenever I play a PlayStation game, you can do achievements and stuff like that. And in other games, I might like a particular area for story reasons or same sort of thing. So that's where this video will be me talking. I'll be talking about mainly because it'll just be me just talking about things that I might not be a huge fan of, whether that's story related reasons, achievements they can do on PlayStation or Xbox, that sort of thing, or you can just do within the game while you're going from one plot point to the next. So yeah. So for number 5 is collecting the pigeons in Insomniac Spider-Man 1. Now, on a story or a side quest, like story related thing, I do like it. I think it's somewhat heartwarming because as well as heartbreaking because the more you collect pigeons for Howard in the game, he'll talk to you about his wife and how she passed away, and I think and the pigeons are a way of reminding Howard of his late wife, and I think that's a really heartwarming and sort of like heartbreaking thing. You're helping Howard collect his friends, and that's sort of like connecting him to his wife, but on a collecting sort of going around New York and just collecting them all, it's really annoying because you'll have to go to the place where a pigeon is, and then you have to basically chase it across part of New York, and it can be very annoying at times because you might be getting close to a pigeon and then it might just quickly just change direction, and yeah, it can be a bit annoying, and yeah, it's just one of those things that's just if you want to, I think it's required for you to collect the pigeon to get the trophy, I believe, if I remember correctly. But as a whole, it's very annoying if you want to try and collect every single pigeon. But on a story-related thing, it's quite heartwarming and heartbreaking. So yeah. For number 4 is the Fire Temple from Tears of the Kingdom. Now, the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom are 100 times better than the dungeons in Breath of the Wild, because with the ones in Breath of the Wild, it was just the same for dungeons, just back to back. But just in a different section. Like you've got the divine beasts like Var Meadow, Var Rudania, Var the other ones. I don't Var Naburu and Var the other. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that all of the Varuta, yeah. And what I basically mean by that is that those sections were fun but not enjoyable. They were enjoyable, but they were just the same thing. And in Tears of the Kingdom, the dungeons are a whole lot better. Like they actually feel like they fit the areas that you go to. But when it comes to the Fire Temple, that's not my favorite dungeon that you go to in the game because it's basically this giant mining facility looking area that you can find in the depths, and as a whole, there's one thing I do like about the Fire Temple in that game is that you can find it in the depths, and I think that's really cool, and that's probably the only thing that I can give it a bit of a compliment because it's very confusing. It's kind of like when you go through the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time for the first time, and you'll get confused of where to go and which water level you need to get to a certain area, that sort of thing. And it's kind of like that with the Fire Temple. But yeah, I think but instead of having to go onto water, you have to like go on these cart rails and stuff like that and change the direction of where you're going, and using the lava or using bridges or something like that to try and get to higher areas and stuff like that. And I think it can be quite confusing whenever you're going through the temple for the first time, or if you're going through the temple again on a repeat playthrough, like a few months down the line. I think if you just walk around the temple for a bit you might be able to get your bearings, but as a whole, the temple isn't my favorite in the game. But it does have a very unique boss fight with Goma. That I think that's one of the other things that I can actually compliment about the dungeon. But as a whole, it's quite confusing and it's not my personal favorite dungeon in the kingdom. So yeah. For number 3 is the Okumura Palace in Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal. Now with this dungeon, it's basically, I think what I'm not a huge fan of is one, the setup, and 2, the exploration. Well, part of the exploration, because the setup, I can see where the game is going with, because throughout the game, during that part of the game, before we actually get into the arc proper, is that Ryuji, I think, before the events start, has been calling Morgana useless, because we've been having more and more members added, and recently at that point of the game, we had just got Futaba, who is a navigator for the team, and then before her we had Makoto, who was the strategist of the team, and I would say from there onwards you can kind of see, I think the game is trying to show you that Morgana feels like he's not worth it for the team. He feels like he's not putting a whole lot of his weight, and I think I can understand where that's coming from at a point, but I think as a whole the Okumura Palace is really annoying, because I think it's mainly because of the exploration, and there are some parts where you have to find information about certain people or certain robots, and also I think areas of leadership or something like that. It's been a while since I've played Persona 5 and Royal, but as for the palace as a whole, you mainly fight robots in terms of the mini bosses, and when it comes to the final boss, it's just robots, and that's really, really dull. And I think Persona 5, the original, makes it even worse, because at that point in the game, you just unlocked Haru, and she doesn't have the baton pass. And if you've played the original Persona 5, you will know that the baton pass doesn't unlock until you've reached a certain point in a person's social link when they're on your party. It does. I think the dungeon is a bit better in Royal, because you do have the baton pass fully unlocked straight away when you get a new party member. I think that's good, but I think as a whole, the Okumura Palace is not my favourite in terms of not my favourite dungeon in Persona 5 or Royal, and it just feels a bit bland. I do like the whole space theme is going on. I think that's quite interesting, and I think it fits the whole thing or that part of the game well with who you're trying to steal the heart from. But as a whole, it feels a bit bland as a dungeon, and I think the theme as well, whenever you're running about, it does also feel a bit bland as well. So yeah, not my personal favourite. For number 2 is time sections. Now, this is nothing new in video games. At least every or a whole lot of games have had time sections before, whether that's time trials, or if they're trying to escape a certain area in time, or whether it's just a leaderboard on a racing game or something like that. But what I'm talking about is games like Resident Evil, mainly games like Resident Evil that have a timed-based thing, in the sense that you have 10 minutes to escape this particular area before it all explodes and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of stuff like that, because I think I've said this in a lot of videos before, that I'm not a huge fan of timed sections, because it just makes me feel like that. Obviously it's there to make you rush, but a lot of the time I feel like I'm going to mess up, or like, okay, I need to do this in a particular amount of time, but there's a long road from me to the end within this time, and even if I mess up a couple of times, that feels like I'm wasting a whole lot of time. And in some games, like the Resident Evil games, I think they're quite generous in some of the games that do have the timed sections. I think they are quite generous sometimes, but not a huge amount of time. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the whole time sections. It's kind of like if you're playing Phantom Hourglass and you're just going through the Temple of the Ocean King. It's like that. I'm not a huge fan of the Temple of the Ocean King, mainly due to the timer and the repeat times you go back. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the time sections, and yeah, I'm not a huge. I just don't like it when games do it. But from a story based thing, I can see why they will need to do that. So yeah. And for number one is the Resident Evil 7 banned footage DLC trophy achievements. Now, with this, I'm not a huge fan of trying to get these achievements. I think they are fun to try and get because what I mean by this is that in Resident Evil 7, you can play through some DLCs, and the DLCs you can do in this game are quite fun, and I think on a story thing, because some of these have story elements to the main game, they're quite fun to see what's happened before the events of Resident Evil 7. But when you're trying to go for the achievements, they can be a bit difficult, and they require you to be a lot of them to be quite perfect when you're playing through each of the things. You can cheese some of them if you're careful enough, because I remember I watched a video in order to get the Night Terrors trophy, which is the hard mode for the Nightmare section. I remember I watched a video where you could just use a circular store and just stay in one place until the end of until you beat the game or that part of the game. And yeah, it can be, when it comes to those sort of games, it can be a bit hard at first, but once you've either figured out the mechanics of the particular section, or you might have looked at a guide or something that helps you. I think the games for the DLC can be cheesed quite a bit, but I think as a whole, I'm not a huge fan of trying to get them because they can be quite difficult, and I think getting the achievements and the trophies, I think, makes it worthwhile because it feels like you've actually, and when you play the game, it feels like you've actually managed to do that accomplishment. You made you go above and beyond when playing those particular modes. So, for example, in Survival, or 21, which is the mini game, it's got two modes: Survival, Survival Plus, and they're basically beat a certain amount of enemies without dying. And in Survival, you have to make sure that you've beat 5 opponents without getting your fingers chopped off. And then in Survival Plus, the amount of players you fight against are doubled to 10. And then you have to make sure that you don't get electrocuted. So it does get a bit more challenging, but I think from an achievement sort of structure, it's really, really difficult to try and get to the final opponent and trying to beat them, because the last opponent is always going to be difficult to fight against. And I think when it comes to things like 21 or Nightmare or Ethan Must Die, you have to really try and strategize on how you play through those particular areas than just try and get the achievement. So as a whole, from an achievement-based thing, the Resident Evil 7 banned footage achievements are quite difficult to get. So yeah, and it's can be a bit stressful sometimes. So yeah, so that's been my top 5 least favorite moments / areas in video games. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.